You're listening to Change Your POV Podcast, episode 124.
If I don't get morning productivity, it's just broken up all over the place. And it kind of works, but if I can get it as part of my routine, getting it into the routine was hard. But once it was in the routine, I found that I was so much more productive. I was so much happier. Just starting the day with something already done feels amazing.
Welcome to Change Your POV Podcast, helping you navigate transitions in your life, like entering and exiting college or the military, changing jobs or careers, and providing you with the coaching and mentorship needed to help you advance in your personal or professional life. Sometimes all you need is to change your point of view. Now, here's your host, Eddie Lazary.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Change Your POV Podcast. I am your host, Eddie Lazary, and I am joined today by none other than our good friend, Mr. Lee Mowat. How you doing today, Lee?
I'm doing fantastic, Ed. I hope you're doing as good as I am.
I am doing fantastic. That's the way we roll here. So today we're going to talk about finding the margins in our lives and learning how to make the most of them. But before we get down that road, I would like to have a quick shout out to this week's sponsor, Audible.com. Now, folks, if you're listening to this podcast, chances of you also listening to audiobooks are probably pretty high. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from in every genre: thrillers, business, romance, comedy, sci-fi, and more. And Audible titles play on iPhone, Kindle, Android, and more than 500 other listening devices anytime, anywhere. I personally am listening to a book called TED Talks. It's actually authored and narrated by the same individual, and it's an unabridged version of basically how to give a good TED Talk. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I love TED Talks, and I love public speaking, and I figured out, why not learn it from the guy that's basically the curator of TED Talks? And that's what I'm listening. Actually listened to it through once already. Now I'm going back through and making more detailed notes and taking down some good lessons learned and things like that to be able to apply to my public speaking. Lee, what are you listening to right now, or what have you last listened to?
It's funny you say you're listening to the TED Talk book a second time. I, too, am listening to a particular book I like a second, and possibly this may even be the third time I'm listening to it from Audible. It's rather famous one called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I've read this before, I've listened to it before, and I'm listening to it again. Why am I listening to it again? I always uncover things I did not hear before when I go through it again. And the book is so valuable to me, what I think and what I'm doing in my life and business. So I'm very glad to be listening to that for about the third time now.
That's awesome. How long have you been listening to audiobooks?
Oh, at least 10 years.
Oh, wow. Much longer than me. So you got a few titles under your belt then.
Oh, yes. I have a rather large audiobook collection. What happened, 12 years ago when I had an accident, I was recovering from it. That's when I was introduced to audiobooks as a way of just lying on the couch and making productive use of my time while just lying on the couch healing. So the habit has stayed with me ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, so folks, if you're interested in learning more about how you can get hooked up with Audible.com, just head on over to changeyourpov.com/free book. And when you're over there, you could sign up for a free audio download and a free 30-day trial. Again, that's changeyourpov.com/free book. So we're going to talk about margins in your life. And so first, I think it would be fitting if we kind of describe that term margins. Now, we often we often hear the word margins when we're talking about profit margins, right? So profit margins is that it's the space between how much something costs and how much we're able to get for it, right? And that profit margin. And the larger the margin means the more profit that we have. And so there's ways to make those margins larger by reducing cost or by selling it for a higher price. That will increase the margins. And so that's one method of margin, or one form of a margin that most people are probably most familiar listening to, that term margin. There's other definitions, though, in terms of margins. And what we're talking about tonight is finding the margins in our life in terms of time. Now, we all are given the same 24 hours on the day, every day, right? We are all blessed with the same 24 hours every day. The question, though, becomes, why are some people more productive than other people? They don't get any more time than we do, right? Larry Broughton doesn't get more than 24 hours a day, or Oprah Winfrey, or, the President of the United States even keeps a 24-hour clock every single day. That's just the way that it is. But you see some people that are far more productive than others. So is it because they're smarter or faster or can multitask better, or what is it? And I think that's where we're going to get into this topic tonight. And that really is these margins. We have things that we've committed to in our life that we can't kind of escape or get out of. And so the question really becomes, above and beyond those times that we've committed, what time is left? And how do we find those times? And then how do we make the best of them, right?
If I can start off here for just a brief bit, you mentioned a few people who we kind of look up to as accomplishing a lot. One of the things that these people that you mentioned all have in common, at least from what I can see, is they have a team behind them. Let's get this fact out of the way, because most of us don't have a team. I used to work for a company, and I had a team of people reporting to me, and I was able to come up with 3 or 4 ideas a week and have them executed by the team. This, the team, of course, belonged to the company. I was the manager of the team. So the things that I wanted to do with this team, I had multiple hands and multiple minds even executing my ideas. Today, Ed, I don't have that team with me. And I have to look at my life as best as I can, knowing that I am the primary executor, the primary generator of ideas, the primary, manager of my time. So it becomes a lot more important now that there is no team behind me, and yet I still want to do great things. Mm-hmm. So where do I get the margins to do these great things when I don't have any time? I just wanted to start off by, because lots of people are going to say, they give themselves lots of excuses. I have no money, I have no team. I myself gave that excuse to myself of having no team behind me, therefore I couldn't do anything.
Right.
But I had to get out of that mindset quickly. Otherwise, I would never get anything done.
Yeah, that's an excellent distinction that you made there. And it's so true. We are talking about, let's call us individual contributors, right? We're individuals that have personal goals or things that we want to accomplish, and we don't have necessarily a team. Although, we're not, unless you're a bachelor and you live all by yourself, there are some, to some degree, we do have some teams, whether it be a wife or children or
we can call that support.
Yeah, there you go.
We do have support.
Yeah, I agree.
And so,
a team, you kind of direct the team. You've got the power to influence the team. I don't know about you, but I don't have a whole lot of power to influence my wife or my kids, right?
Likewise. But I do get support from them.
Right,
I do get support from them.
Absolutely.
But they won't execute my ideas, especially the way I like them.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to talk about 6 steps to find your margins in your life and how to make the most of them. And we're just going to go through here one at a time. And the first one is how to find your margins. Now, like I said, we're all given that same 24 hours in a day, but a lot of people when or let's define some things. And this isn't an all-inclusive list, but there are some things that I hear often that people want to do or accomplish. Like, oh, I want to go back to school and get a degree, or I want to lose weight, or I want to go back to the gym and lose a few pounds, or I want to
learn a new stunt, or
learn a new stunt, or speak another language, or I mean, the list of things that I hear people want to do are endless, but they're usually always followed by the same statement, and that is, but I don't have enough time. Right? I got all these things I want to do, but I don't have enough time. The real thing that we're going to uncover by the time we get to the end of this conversation is it's really not about having enough time. It's about making things a priority. And before we get too far down into that road, let's just talk about how to find your margin. So let's talk about things that we can't get out of, our commitments, right? So I would hope that we would at least commit to ourselves of getting at least 6 hours of sleep a night, right? So let's just say that 6. Now, could you stay up later or get up earlier and maybe get 2 or 3 hours of sleep in? Yeah, you probably can. And a lot of people you'll hear on social media that talk about getting out there and
but be careful about doing that.
You do
have
not.
to be careful about doing that.
That's going to do nothing but in the long. It might work for a day or two, maybe even a week or two, and you might even think you're getting away with it for a month or longer. But at the end of the day, you're trying to survive on that much sleep, and you're going to suffer in other ways.
Right. We have to, when we try to find the margins in our life, we have to determine what's important, because taking away what's important, I need sleep to function and perform the way I want to. If I compromise that, my performance going down. Now, I sometimes must accept a degraded performance because of the circumstances around the day. But to do this on a regular basis is guaranteed failure for anything I want long term.
That's right.
I need that sleep. So, but yet I can get up earlier. One of the ways that I can look at my sleep is toward the end of the day, I find myself winding down. Perhaps I can go to bed earlier and get up earlier. Instead of working at a time like 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock where my mind is somewhat compromised anyway, I can just let it go for that evening and get up earlier without compromising my sleep. The same 6 hours. Instead of going to sleeping from 12 to 6 or 12 to 7, I'm now sleeping from 11 to 5, or 11 to 6. So I'm not compromising my sleep, but I'm using my mind when it's most productive. Right before I need to go to bed, my mind isn't all that productive, so I will save the priorities of my life for the early morning hours.
Yeah.
And I find that makes a big difference, and I can still get my sleep.
Yep. So sleep, let's not compromise on our sleep. So if we take 24 hours and we subtract 6 hours a day for sleep, that leaves us with, 18 hours? And if we got, I'm not retired like you, Lee, so I have a 9-to-5er, right, a job or a commitment that I need to keep for, 8 hours a day. And so, you subtract that, now I'm left with 10 hours a day, basically, that I have. And of course, anybody that's married and has kids, then you really need to start thinking about partitioning some time for them, because if you don't, then relationships begin to suffer. And, like I said, this is a very difficult thing to juggle and to manage, but it's important.
Yes, I made that mistake.
Yeah, and I have too, and I still struggle with it. There's a lot of things that I want to do and try to do, and sometimes it's at a cost of something else. And oftentimes the first things to suffer are relationships, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yes. So finding how to find your margins. Here's what I recommend for 2 weeks, and I'll get into why I say 2 weeks in a minute. But for 2 weeks, get a notebook and a pen. And don't do anything different. Don't try to be, just because you're going to keep track of it, don't curb the system here and try to, do something different. You want an honest assessment for 2 weeks of where you spend your time. This is very similar to a lot of people. In order to determine their finances, they'll take a month-long inventory of every dollar, every cent that they spend, and money coming in and all that, in order to understand their finances of where their money is going. This is really no different. This is taking inventory of your time, and you can do this by just writing down, keeping a notebook with you and a pen everywhere you go, and just write down what it is that you do. When do you get up? What do you do when you get up? Are you eating breakfast?
This is very important. This is very important, Ed, because in order to understand the problem, for example, in this case, how to get more time or where is our time going, you have to study the problem in its natural surroundings.
Right.
You have to see this problem in its natural surroundings so you can devise the best solution for it. If you don't know where you're spending your time, how do you know where you can get more time from?
That's right.
How do you know it can be compromised?
That's right.
So studying how you're spending your time for 2 weeks is critical in providing the best solution of how you can get more time.
Mm-hmm. And I say 2 weeks because 2 weeks allows you to also capture 2 weekends. So when I say 2 weeks, it's 2 weekends and 2 full weeks. I recommend doing a full month. If you've got time to do the full month assessment, I recommend the full month. But if you're looking to go back to school or start a second job or learn another language or read a book or whatever it is that you've got on your to-do list to do, and that's going to require some significant time, in order to figure out where you're going to fit that in, you need a good assessment, a good inventory of your time. So the bare minimum, I would say 2 weeks, including 2 weekends, and or 1 month. And then once you get that honest assessment and you catalog it out, you can really start to see where your margins are. You can literally block out the areas that you have committed that you can't get away from, like your job, for example, the 6 hours of sleep that we've already mentioned. But then you can go in and start highlighting things that are considered your margins, things that you're doing that you could probably do away with and be okay with. Like, I don't know, like we talked before we started recording, binge watching episodes of Netflix, for example.
You'd be embarrassed to find out, once you start doing this 2-week exercise, you'd almost begin to be embarrassed at where some of your time is going. I know I was when I did this. And, but it's important to know how you're spending your time. One of the ways I get together with my wife is just to watch a little television in the evening, because that's something we normally do right after dinner. I didn't want to give that up, but I found a way to keep that and still get some time, by studying where I spend my time after, before, during. I was able to keep the important things and able to express to myself why these things were important, why I didn't want to give them up, and which one's more important between the goals I want to accomplish, the goals I felt nebulous about, and be able to spread my time much more wisely after I did this exercise.
Yeah, you'll be amazed to find. Show of hands, how many people sit on the toilet thumbing through Facebook until their legs fall asleep? Right? Come on. There's a lot of people out there listening.
No,
like,
I can't raise my hand to that one, but guilty. I can raise my hand to a few others.
So it's amazing what we actually spend our time doing, and without even realize it, and saying, because it's too easy to cop out with I wish I could do X, but I can't because I don't have enough time. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
And and we've got now, we are also including David Drayton to this conversation. Now, David, for the folks that are listening for the first time, have never been introduced to David. They've listened to Lee a couple of times on a few different episodes, but David is actually the creator of our mastermind group. He's the one that went to meetups.com, which we've talked about the power of meetups. And Dave got on there and created a mastermind group for people that are interested in creating, businesses, whether it be products or online communities. Like Lee and I are both podcasters. Dave actually sells product on Amazon through the FBA program. So welcome to the show, Dave. How you doing?
Pretty good. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, so we're talking about...
Dave is even worse than you, Ed, in that he has a young child.
Yeah, so
you
spend
a lot of time.
Yes, you throw the little
I can
kids into
definitely
there.
relate. can definitely relate to the whole not having time for anything thing. It's kind of out of desperation that I've tried to hack time as much as I have.
Yes.
And speaking of my kid, he's actually here right now, so I apologize if he suddenly makes a ton of noise.
No, that's awesome.
Okay.
Everyone that listens to the show knows that I have a herd of dogs and all kinds. So yeah, we keep it real here, folks. So Dave, real quick, we just got through topic, or not topic, but step number 1, which is how to find your margins. Now we're going to move into determining which of those margins are the most productive. So we talked about taking an inventory of our time by keeping a catalog for at least 2 weeks. I recommend a month, but for at least 2 weeks, doing a catalog of your time, figuring out where your time is actually going, and you got to be brutally honest with yourself when you're doing this exercise, because if you fudge the numbers or the time or whatever it is that you're doing, and you're not going to get a real result, and it's going to be not very impactful. So figuring out where your margins are by capturing your time, and then determining which of those margins are your most productive. And Lee, you already kind of started going down this road because you were talking about different times of the day or different margins within your day as being, some are more productive than others. Some people find early morning to be way more productive. Some people are what we call night owls, and they like to do the things that are more mentally engaging in the evening. What's your take? When do you feel that you're most productive?
Usually most productive in the morning. It starts to wane off about 2:00. So what I've decided to do, how do I take advantage of that, is the most productive part of my day being the morning. I will focus that portion of the day on my highest priority goals. And I always put my highest priority goals in the between 8:30 to 1:00, 2:00. And then I will go to a second tier priority. That's the time I will go to the gym or work on financial aspects or some other thing, something that doesn't require as much mental energy or is not as important. And then in the evening, I will usually go to a third tier, something I can do without thinking, until bedtime, where I just read and sometimes relax. So that's how I've structured the day. How about you, Dave? You have a small child there. How do you find, he's not paying attention to time. How do you pay attention to, how do you capture your most productive times?
I'm also finding that mornings is kind of the only time I can actually do stuff on a reliable basis. If I don't get morning productivity, it's just broken up all over the place. And it kind of works, but if I can get it as part of my routine, getting it into the routine was hard. But once it was in the routine, I found that I was so much more productive. I was so much happier. Just starting the day with something already done feels amazing. And then it kind of snowballs into the rest of the day.
So what did you do?
That's actually a good point.
Dave, what are some of the things that you did to get it into your routine to begin with?
Well, I find the way that I can work stuff into my routine is by making an existing part of my routine dependent on the new habit that I want to form.
That's awesome, man.
So like, let's say I want to get a habit of journaling. Like, that's something that I didn't do for a while because I didn't think I had time to do journaling. But I'll listen to all these podcasts and they're like, oh, you got to do journaling. So the way that I did that was I have this toothbrush. It's one of those electric toothbrushes, and it's kind of thick, so I can write stuff on it. So I wrote on my toothbrush, journal first. And so, like, brushing my teeth is something that I do every night, and I'm not going to stop doing every night. And it's a very established part of my routine. And so every time I would go brush my teeth, I would see journal first and be like, oh crap, I got to go do that, or I'm not allowed to brush my teeth.
Oh,
You know?
Ah.
So I find a very established piece of routine and I build off of it.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a kind of a cool
I
life
find that
hack.
to be, yeah, I find that to be the most effective way by far for me to build new pieces of routine.
That's nice.
If I want to find time or something to do something like that, I'll find the time if I make stuff that I have to do dependent on doing this other stuff.
Right. That's good. I think when you first started to go down that road, I thought you were going to say you actually journaled on your toothbrush.
No,
I was wondering too.
Yeah, right.
Like that is one big toothbrush, man.
Yeah. But doing the journal thing was actually really important for me because what that allowed me to do was set my goal for the next day. And so
Right.
I found that to be a really important part of being able to motivate myself and find time to get stuff done. Because if I knew what the one thing was that I had to accomplish that day already was, then I could find time to do it. Or like I could actually think early in the day, okay, well I got to do this one thing today, and try not to make it more than one thing, because if it's more than one thing, you're not going to accomplish either of those things.
Right.
But if you just do one thing, and that's the only thing you have to accomplish all day, and you know the night before what it is, then when you wake up the next day, like, you will find time to do it.
That's right.
If there's just one, and you already know what it is.
Yeah.
That's been really helpful.
That's actually a good point, because I find, with an ambitions like mine, Ed, I will write down one thing and then it'll creep to 2 and 3. And next thing I know, I'm carrying around a to-do list that's 10 items long. What Dave said is rather important. If we want to find the time for our most important tasks or something new we want to do, we have to, 1, put it first, and 2, isolate it in some manner. Our day consists of many things we have to do, mostly of a maintenance perspective. Pay bills, brush my teeth, cook meals, et cetera, but our goals have to build up on our activity every day. And so having each day devoted, some portion of it devoted to your special goals, is rather important. I find that to be very important, and I prefer that to be in the first parts of the day.
Yeah.
But then the trick becomes, if you only have one thing to do, so you can set that goal, you want to make sure you're setting that goal to be the right thing, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So that's something a couple people have asked me, like, oh, how do you choose that one thing? And so I read a book called The One Thing.
Yep, me too.
And,
Oh yes. Yep.
Yeah, so you guys know, it basically is an entire book dedicated to how do you choose the one thing to work on today. And it's kind of repetitive, but it all comes down to this one sentence in the book that it reiterates over and over and over again.
The other book that I read that's very good, that I actually listened to it on Audible. It was right around the same time. I think I listened to The One Thing first, and then a book that I was recommended to was it's called The Power of Habit. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh yes, I've read that.
Yeah,
I've read that one.
That's excellent. So if you've never read or listened to that, I recommend The Power of Habit, and it really gets into kind of what you're talking about, Dave, and that is, don't just try to create something from nothing. Try to figure out how to create a new habit based off of something that you're already doing in your life. So that's the reason why I thought maybe you might have read it, because it's the way that you've incorporated that new habit of journaling into an existing habit is kind of the premise of the book, The Power of Habit. And so, determining which margins in our life we are most productive. Once we understand what our margins are, then getting into which of those margins are we the most productive is very powerful. And I said most productive, and I could probably have broken it up into other categories as well, because in the morning, I am the most productive earlier in the morning. However, I am the most creative later in the evening. And productive and creative are two different things. I don't get a whole lot done from a productive standpoint in the evening, but that's when like thoughts come into my head and new ideas come, and that's when I find myself writing things down a lot. So I keep a notebook and pen on my nightstand, because things will pop into my head. And if I just lay there and think about them, or try to say, oh my God, how am I going to remember this in the morning? Because it's such a great idea, I want to remember this. I'll lay there and not be able to get very good sleep. But if I wake up and turn my light on and I just do a brain dump real quick, and I just write down those thoughts or those ideas or whatever into my notebook, and then I can just kind of, once I get it out of my head, then I can lay down and actually go back to sleep. You know what I'm saying?
That's good, Ed. But I want to make an observation of something. You have studied yourself long enough to know that the morning is good for X, the evening is good for Y. Many of us, you're not included in this. Maybe I'm not either. But many of us don't know ourselves that well to know that our strongest points are here or there, and that we are most capable here or whatever. And so how do we come to know ourselves better to understand when's the best time for us to get our work done? That's an interesting question that I have not been able to answer. Now, I know these answers for myself. I'm 66 years old, and I've been living with myself that time and can answer those type of questions for myself. But were I 20 or 30, I never knew the answers to when my best times were for the variety of things.
Yeah.
So you have a tremendous advantage in knowing that you work best, most productively in the morning and most creatively in the evening. So that's a tremendous advantage to know that, Ed.
Yeah. And I think it just really comes down to listening to yourself. Like I come up with I got an hour commute to and from work every day. And oftentimes when I'm in the car, that's another trigger for me where I become very creative. It's not all the time or every day, but oftentimes because I like public speaking and I like to write. I like to write, whether it's blog posts or write for speeches or things like that. And I find that I am very creative in the car, and I found it difficult because I'm like, damn, how can I write this stuff down while I'm in the car driving? And then I'll try to remember it, so by the time I stop somewhere, I can write it down. But by the time I get to where I'm going, I forget all about it. So another little hack for me is I got a voice recorder on my phone, and as these thoughts come into my head, I'll actually talk into the voice recorder, and I'll record my talk or my speech or a blog post idea or a podcast idea. And then that way it's captured, and then I can write it down and modify it later. And so it's just being cognizant of your own self, I think, being more self-aware and listening to yourself. Don't try to fight it, I guess is what I'm saying. If you try to fight yourself and try to remember things for later, or you don't, have something to write things down when you have something to pop into your head. Like I like to come up with ideas while I'm in the shower. So oftentimes I'll have a notebook in the bathroom so I can write something down, a notebook by my bedstand. I record myself while I'm driving. So I give myself ways and opportunities to capture and harness those parts during my day when I'm productive or creative.
So you're disciplined enough to know that you will at any moment need to write something down, and you're prepared to do that, or to need to speak into the phone. This is part of my productivity as well. I started doing exactly that, Ed, since the time I've joined this mastermind group on a suggestion from, I think, Dave, to speak to your phone, to capture these ideas down. And I've found myself, when I'm ready to get creative, these ideas are waiting for me to think about more and more and more. And so I don't have to force myself to be creative when I really want to be productive.
Right, exactly.
Or vice versa.
Right.
Yeah. And so
I'd say be careful with how you use the word disciplined, though. The more time I spend in the entrepreneurial space, the less I think discipline is really a thing. I feel like it's really like you see this person who seems super disciplined, but really all they've done is just incorporated a bunch of habits. And what those habits are, I mean, when you think of someone who's disciplined, you think of someone who puts like a monk, and he just sits there and he practices something until it's perfect because he's super disciplined. But what's really happened is that person has figured out like some repetitive task that he's done so much it doesn't take effort anymore. Like when you think of discipline, you think of it taking a lot of effort, but what it really is just creating habits so that stuff that would take effort doesn't.
That's actually
so
a
it
good
really
point.
It all just comes down to making habits that get you to where you want to be.
Right.
That's a very good point, Dave. You know, the habits we use create the structure around us by which we're going to achieve. But discipline is more than habit, I think. But I believe habit is an extremely important part of discipline. Because let's say I'm going to use an example, an unrealistic, gross example. Let's say you have two of your friends. One of them has is having a heart attack. The other one's about to be hit by a train. You have to decide. I know this is a strange example.
Where's this going?
You have to decide which one you're going to pay attention to. Both of them need your attention, and whatever decision that you make at that point, that's when you're going to be focused on. You have the discipline at that point to not pay attention to anything else. So in addition to habit, discipline also requires focus. You know, the more you want the goal that you're striving for, the more discipline, the easier it will find the discipline to achieve it. So habit is just one of the elements that go into discipline, I believe.
Yeah. And number 3, communicate your intent. So we've found our margins. We've determined which margins we are the most productive in. And folks, if you haven't figured it out already, all these little bits of time along the way that we've been discussing are all margins. In the shower, before you go to bed, while you're driving in your car, when you're brushing your teeth. These are all little moments in your life that you could take advantage of to capture an idea, a thought, do some meditation, do some things that are productive that help move the needle. Now, when we're talking about finding margins in your life, you're not going to find huge swaths of time. You're not going to find 6 hours laying around that you didn't know existed. You're going to pinch and grab and scratch, a minute here, 5 minutes there. That's where you're going to come up with these margins. The question is, what do you do with them, and how do you make them the most productive and the most valuable for you during those times? So once you've found your margins, you've determined which ones are the most productive. The next is to communicate your intent. So now you've got this big thing that you want to start in your life. Maybe you want to go back to school, or you want to go back to the gym and lose some weight, or you want to learn a new language, or you want to start to sell product on Amazon, or you want to start a podcast or a blog. The list goes on and on. The first thing you need to do is go back to, we talked at the top of the show, the difference between a team and supporters. Now, unless you have people that you've hired, those are people that you call your team, or people that are in your immediate circle of friends and family, those are called your supporters. It's important to communicate your intent to your supporters. You've got to let them know, hey, don't erase that off of my toothbrush. I need that, right, in order to trigger me to journal, for example. You've got to let those people in and around you know what you're doing, know why you're doing them, so they can not just know, but so they can help and support you. Like my wife knows that I keep the notebook by my headstand, and she knows not to do anything with it or touch it. Or if she finds the notebook on the bathroom counter in a pen, it's there for a reason. Don't, leave it there, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So it's not a mystery to the people in my family or around me. They know what I'm doing. They know why I'm doing it. Or I'm in a car and I get like a wild, crazy hair. All of a sudden I want to capture something. I'll plug in my earbuds. I'll hit the recorder. My family could be in the car and I'll just talk, and they'll just be respectful and they'll be quiet for a minute and let me get it off my chest, record it. And then I move on about my day. I mean, so it's really about communicating your intent, because if you don't, then you could meet a little bit of resistance. Have you found that to be the case in any way for either of you?
I have. If I do not announce what I'm trying to achieve, then all the efforts that I put into trying to achieve it could be misinterpreted. When you start to change your habit structures around you, when other people are involved, they need to be brought up to speed as to what you're trying to do. Otherwise, they could resist those changes of habits. You know, if I wanted to lose weight by stopping my eating earlier in the evening, well, now this is affecting everyone else, and I have to announce and communicate and see how this is going to fit in with everyone else. So communication, when it comes to achieving special goals, is very important as well. How about you, David? You know, you have a small child. He's not going to listen to you. And, you know, how do you communicate a change of habits that you'd like to put forth?
Well, I don't really communicate it too much to my son. Doesn't really know what's going on yet. But communicating it to my wife, that has been important. The biggest change I can think of is I was trying to transition to waking up early in the mornings, and I wanted to get up at like 5:30 every morning so I could have a couple hours before I went to work where I could work on before I went to work. But working on stuff I actually wanted to do, and that was this like online business stuff.
Yep.
But in order to accomplish that, I needed to go to bed way earlier because I was going to bed at like 10:30 or 11 o'clock, sometimes later every night. But if I wanted to get up at 5:30, I have to go to bed at like 9:30 or 10, the latest. And so communicating that and the reasons behind it were really important, because like that time at night was one of the only times that Lizzie, who's my wife, and I would really be able to do anything, because that's after our son goes to bed. So it's still something we're kind of trying to figure out and struggling with. How do we balance like productivity with family time and stuff like that? But just communicating that in general at least gave her a good sense of what I was trying to accomplish. And when I say something like, all right, it's almost 9:30, I'm going to start heading to bed, she understands that, and she's not saying things like, oh, but let's stay up and watch an episode of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something, or Game of Thrones, you know, because she knows I'm doing this so that I can get up and work on our future.
Right.
Yeah.
A question that I'd like to ask you, Ed. You recently had a period of time when your family wasn't with you at home. They were vacationing elsewhere. And did you find that time to be more productive? Time to be more distracted?
Both. It was kind of weird. Yeah. So they spent the summer back in Wyoming with my in-laws for the summer, my wife and my daughter, and my son was off to college. So yeah, I was here by myself for the summer, and it was good because I got a lot done. But it was also bad because I knew that I was afraid that I was going to work myself into a habit, like Dave was talking about, a routine that I knew wouldn't last when my family got home. And so I didn't want to get so comfortable with a particular routine that when they came home and that I wouldn't be able to see through whatever initiatives I had started. So I had to kind of really pace myself and be cognizant of the time that I was spending, so not to find myself in that trap. So yeah, it was a good question, and you're right. It's you might think on one hand it'd be really easy and very productive, and on one hand it was, but on the other hand it was very nerve-wracking from the sense that I was really scared I was going to throw off my entire schedule. So
yeah, you knew you couldn't keep that up.
Yeah, no, I couldn't do it.
All
right, so we're going to get it. Number 4 is now that we found, we found our margins. 2, we've determined where our productivity lies. Number 3, we've communicated our intent to our supporters. Number 4 is to document our progress. I don't know who said this first, but I remember hearing somebody once say, and it's very true, and that is You can't improve what you don't measure.
That's right. If you're not measuring it, you can't improve it. Yes, that was first said by Peter Drucker.
Oh, there we go. Drucker. I love Drucker. Yes,
Yeah.
The Effective Executive. If you've never read it, another great book. Document your progress. How do you know if you're on the right track if you don't have a way to measure it? Capturing what it is that you're doing to take advantage of those margins is very critical. So, Dave, you were talking about incorporating journaling into more of a routine, keeping track of, did you have a goal of once a day or once a week or whatever it is? Did you actually accomplish that? And if no, then why no? You found those margins. You figured out when you were productive. You've communicated your intent to your support staff. And now you're realizing that you're not achieving or at least making the most of those margins. Why is that? It's important to understand why that is. So documenting your progress not only does two things for me. One, it lets me know whether or not I'm doing what I want to do. And two, it helps me look back and see what I've been able to achieve. I don't know if you guys have that same result, but I'll write down what I've done, if for no other reason, for 2 or 3 weeks later, or even 2 or 3 months later, look back and say, especially during those times when I feel like I'm not making much progress, I'll look back and I'll be like, but look what I've been able to accomplish in these 2 months. I've done this and this and this and this. And so documenting your progress is not only keeps me on track, but it keeps me really, really motivated to keep going.
For me, in this area, I struggle with not just, I can choose between doing things right and doing the right things. And so when I make attempts to measure things, this is very good for me because it helps me to know that I'm doing the right things, not just doing things right.
Yeah.
Because I have found myself in the past to be being very, very busy, as well as being very unproductive at the same time.
Right. Yep.
And so, so the measurement of things is important for me because it helps me know that I'm doing the right things, not just things right.
Yeah.
And without measuring, I cannot determine that because once I focus my head into some task, whether it's important, relevant or not, I'm full in and I can't determine if my goal needs this to happen or not. I'm full in. So I have to measure. Otherwise I end up in these time traps where I'm working on things that are truly interesting, very rewarding, and mean nothing.
Right.
To my goal.
Right.
Anyways. So measurement allows me to address that.
And now Dave, he is the king of analysis. Mr. Paralysis by analysis, Mr. Dave Drayton. So I know you track everything to the nth degree. When it comes to taking advantage of the margins in your life, how do you keep track, or what's the advantages for you?
It's hard. I don't think there's like a secret to it that we'll reveal in this podcast. But I mean, when I make my journal entries, a lot of times I don't accomplish that one thing. And it's just because I'm human, I get distracted and stuff. But when I do achieve it, it feels really good. And like you said, you can look back on that. But what I find I can keep track of much easier than trying to keep track of like these one-time goal things is things that I can measure in a more tangible sense, like yes or no, did I achieve this, or dollars and cents. Like for me, a lot of my goals are dollar and cent related.
So you measure easy.
Right. So it's easy to measure. So for example, I have a goal of hitting X dollars per month in 3 months from now. So what I'll do is I'll like chart out, okay, 3 months from now I need to be at this amount. So that means at 2 months from now I need to be at this amount, and 1 month from now I need to be at this amount. Okay, so how do I get to that 1 month mark? And I'll kind of plan, how do I get to that 1 month mark? What are the steps to get there? And so I just plan out like what, if I have that that blueprint,
Mhm.
it tells me what I should be working on. And sometimes those don't always have a solid way to record whether or not they were a success or not. It's like, research this thing. Okay, I researched the thing, and how successful was that? I just spent like 8 hours doing this thing, but it might not feel very productive until you get to the next step or the next 3 steps. But then what really matters is, at the end of the day, did you accomplish your goal? And that's why setting the goal in the first place is so critical, because you need to set a goal that can be measured.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I went through an exercise recently, and Lee, you were there, where I had people set a SMART goal, SMART being an acronym. And I always need a reminder on what the acronym stands for.
Specific, measurable, attainable,
relevant,
time-bound.
and time-bound.
Yeah.
And so setting your goal so that it has all of those attributes is really, really, really important, because if you don't have any one of those, it's going to be really easy to not be able to know whether or not you even reached the goal. Or if you do reach the goal, it might take forever because it wasn't time-bound. I think the time-bound part is one of the most important parts. I don't know if you guys already brought up Parkinson's law.
No, we haven't.
But it's basically, so that was a mind-blowing concept for me, which I found to be unbelievably helpful and explode my productivity. And the Parkinson's law, all it is that the time frame given to a task, the longer time frame you give to the task, the more time the task will take. It'll basically fill up any time frame you give to it. So if you give imagine you give a high school student a month to do a book report. Like when is that kid going to do the book report? Probably on day 28 and 29, 30, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what if you gave that kid a week to do the book report? When would they do it? It would probably be on day 6, right? Or day 5. They'd read the book, they'd spark note it or whatever, and they'd get it done as fast as they can. And that applies to everything in life. I mean, if you don't choose a short timeline for yourself so that you can measure whether or not you achieved that goal in that timeline, it's just going to take forever. And you'll make sure it takes forever, because that's just how your brain works, basically.
Yeah, we
giving
call
yourself unbelievably short.
We call ourselves
is
procrastinators.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, the
same
same is true at work, right? I don't know about you guys, but if you know, I don't know how many meetings I've been at, thousands of meetings at work by now. Oftentimes all the meetings are set for an hour. Why? Because that's Outlook's default is for an hour. And it never fails. Anytime there's a meeting on the books for an hour, that meeting takes an hour. But if you manually go in and change that meeting from the default of 60 minutes to 30 minutes, guess what? You can easily achieve those same meetings in 30 minutes that you could fill up in an hour. But the only reason it took an hour is because that was the amount of time that was allotted for it, right? And that's essentially what you're saying with Parkinson's law there.
But are you there, Ed? You froze.
Yeah, I think we lost Ed.
Nope, I am here.
Okay, he's there.
Okay.
He's there. So,
but anyway, so just getting back to my example. So for me, it's fairly easy for me to judge whether or not I achieved a goal, because I always put a time limit on it. And so I know when to check if I achieved the goal. And there's almost always some number or true or false value associated. Like, did you reach X dollars per month in your business by X date? Yes or no? So that's very easy to check.
And my business is not as easily measured. The measurements are a bit more intangible or vague, but I still have to set hard realities to myself and trying to find that measurable quality. For example, in my case right now is downloads and subscribers, and whatever I can do to affect those numbers. And I gauge my performance by where those numbers go. So I still have to be specific, even though.
But you had, if I remember, we went through an exercise with you that I thought was very illustrative of what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So if I remember, your goal was to have at least, I think it was like some number of quote
Downloads.
engaged. No, you had engaged
Subscribers.
subscribers.
That's right.
And I was like, all right, well, if you want to have some number of engaged subscribers, number one, we need a number on it. Number two, we need to know what the heck an engaged subscriber is. So the idea was to come up with a test, a true or false test that you would either fail or pass at a certain time frame. And in our case, we came up with the idea that, okay, if you define an engaged subscriber as someone who actually responds when you send them an email, then on that date, on your target date, you need to send an email. And if you don't get back 300 or whatever the number was responses, you failed the test.
That's right. That's right. And so, and I like that hard measurement, because I mean, even if I come in at 250, well, that's better than I was before, and I'm pleased by that. But I didn't meet the goal that I had stated, and I can evaluate that goal and the results to it. But that hard measurement gives me that ability to evaluate it, and so I'm appreciative of that hard measurement. What can I say? It works out that way.
So the next one is number 5, tip 5. Or I should say step 5, is to identify what moves the needle. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Lee, about the difference between doing the right things and doing things right.
Yes.
We can be extremely busy doing things that do not matter or do not move the needle or are not productive or do not help us progress in our goals or our objectives. And that's the difference between being busy and being productive, right? And so identifying what moves the needle is the next step, and that's easier said than done. I know that puts it in a nice, neat package, but sometimes that's difficult because sometimes we think what we're doing is moving the needle when in fact it may not be. It may not be, right?
I fall into that all the time. All the time, I have to check out what I'm doing to see if it's relevant or not. So
what are some things, like how do you know that what you're doing is moving the needle for you in your business?
That's interesting. Because I have a goal. We set a goal and we can see how what we're doing relates to that goal. So let's say I'm trying to get 300 subscribers. That means that I have to have a mechanism for them to subscribe through. So that means I have to do some work on my website to produce that mechanism. Well, I can get caught into the details of that in ways you couldn't believe. And so I'm struggling on the color of this thing. I'm struggling on the font, and I'm spending an hour making sure the colors are right and stuff like that. Well, next thing you know, I'm working on something that's keeping me busy, but is not making me productive at all. So I find that I have to ask myself all the time, how is what I'm doing now related to the goal that I'm trying to achieve that put me here in the first place?
Right.
And if I abandon that question for any more than 2 hours, I could be in a danger of doing things that don't relate to my goal.
Yeah, I like that. And Dave, I would imagine selling physical products, you could probably end up down some roads of some actions or some things that just don't move the needle, right?
Yeah, it's kind of hard sometimes because a lot of times, like you said, you think it's going to move the needle, but then it doesn't. It might not have been a good investment or whatever. But I mean, you can still make the right decision, even if that decision doesn't have the results you expected. I mean, it's just because you go down one road that doesn't have the results you expected, you still might have made the right decision to go down that road.
Yeah, right. That's an important point actually, because if you have a good process, that doesn't always mean you'll get great results. But having that good process is more important than having the great results, because a great process will give you good results most of the time.
Right.
And so, I have found that I've been working on stuff that's unproductive, but the reason they become unproductive may be outside of the area that I'm working on. Things may have changed in the industry that hadn't taken into account. And so I always have to keep my head about me in terms of what I'm doing and continually ask the question, Ed, how is what I'm doing related to the goals I'm trying to achieve?
Yeah.
If I abandon that question, it's not going to go well with me.
And I think that's the whole point of this, right? This whole identifying what moves the needles, because if you've got a goal, right, and it doesn't matter what it is, let's use weight loss, for example, right? It's a very common goal that a lot of people have. I want to lose 20 pounds. And I've identified margins in my life, like watching Netflix and surfing Pinterest, for example, as two of the things I could probably cut out in order to carve out some margins for myself in order to lose the weight, right? So instead of spending, let's say, 3 hours a week surfing Facebook and YouTube or whatever it was, then I'm going to do things to lose weight. And all of a sudden I find myself reading Oprah Winfrey's book about her struggles with weight loss. Now, although that book is probably a really great book, by reading that book, is it helping me lose 30 pounds? I probably not. Not unless I'm squatting while I'm doing it or something, right? So it's really about that. I mean, you could end up doing a lot of other things to fill those margins, but if they're not the right things that are helping you move the needle towards your goal, then you probably aren't doing the right things. And so it really comes down to constantly asking yourself that question: is what I'm doing to fill my margins leaning towards the goal that I have, whatever that goal may be?
And that's a question that has to be asked frequently throughout my day.
I think for me, it goes to two different exercises. One is the one I already mentioned, where once you set the goal that you want to achieve, thinking about ahead of time, what do you like, working backwards. Like, say you want to, in my case, everything's dollars. So like, I want to reach a certain amount by 3 months. Okay, how do I get to the 1 month mark? And so you come up with, at the beginning of that month, like a little timeline of, okay, I need to achieve this, this, and this in that order in order to probably get to my goal. And so you can start that way if you can see that far ahead. Like a lot of times you might not be in a situation where this is very feasible, but if you are trying to get that step-by-step process in place, it doesn't have to be totally accurate, but just your best guess. That'll help give you a guideline so that when you're down the road wondering if you're on the right path, you can look at that blueprint that you made and be like, oh, I'm way off kilter here. I'm not doing anything related to this stuff. And who knows, maybe your situation changed and that blueprint isn't relevant anymore, which means your next task could be create a relevant blueprint so that you know what direction you're going and you don't get lost. And it might take some research and some creative thinking to really figure that out, but it's a really worthwhile exercise so that you stay on track. But the other thing that I started to talk about earlier in the podcast was the one thing. And what I started to say was the one sentence that book comes down to is the focusing question, which basically says, what's the one thing that I can work on right now that will make everything else easier or unnecessary? And if you follow that, if you ask yourself that question when you're trying to come up with what to do next, what you'll end up doing is stuff that makes everything else easier. And what that results in is basically exponential growth. Because if you do things that just achieve one little bit of productivity, but it doesn't have an effect of impacting anything else, then you'll have linear growth. But if you have something that makes everything else easier or makes a bunch of stuff unnecessary, then all of a sudden you can just skyrocket to get to your goals because it's impacting every other piece of the puzzle. And then every other piece of the puzzle is that much easier. And then each of those will be other focusing question answers, which will just gets easier and easier over time.
I like that.
So, yeah, absolutely. And so finally,
hardest thing to do.
It is. It
So
is.
ask yourself that question. Usually the answer is, all right, I have to do this thing I really don't want to do, that's really going to suck, and it's going to take a bunch of time, but it's going to be worth the investment because it's going to make everything else easier or unlikely.
Yeah.
And it just takes it takes guts sometimes to go through that.
Yeah. And asking
Yes, it
yourself,
does.
and asking yourselves these questions, it's simple, but it's not always easy, right? Because oftentimes things that are simple are not easy. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes they are not. And that leads us, we're out of time. We're running out of time. So that leaves us with step number 6, and that is adjust accordingly. And I think, Dave, you've already kind of really touched on this. And that is, you just can't blindly continue down the path without stopping every once in a while and checking your GPS, right? Am I where I think I am? Am I going where I think I should be? And is the destination where I think it is? Because if you don't do that on a regular basis, adjust accordingly. Let's say, I often hear people say that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And although it does, if you step off in the wrong direction, you can end up 2,000 miles in the wrong direction. So adjusting accordingly is incredibly important.
Absolutely. So,
all right, Dave, Lee, I really do appreciate your guys' time. This has been a great discussion. I think we could have gone down.
I could have continued.
Yeah, there's a lot more to say.
Yeah, it's very difficult to take something like this and kind of cut it into an hour-long episode. But this is really just to help anyone that's never been successful at trying to figure out how to carve out more time in their life in order to do the things that they've always wanted to do. Regardless of what that is, if you want to do it, you can. It's about not finding more time, because you're not going to find it. Time is finite. It's 24 hours in a day. Everybody gets the same amount, regardless of what you do or what you don't do. It's about finding the priority and figuring out where the margins are in your life and finding out how you can make the most of them. All right, folks, you can check out all the show notes for this episode by heading over to changeyourpov.com/episode 124. Never miss an episode. Hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. We have a lot more great content headed your way. Come be part of our community over at Change Your POV Squad, which is our Facebook group page. And just search for it by clicking Change Your POV Squad. I would love to see you there. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Change Your POV podcast with Eddie Lazary. Check out more content by going to changeyourpov.com. And remember, your ability and willingness to change your point of view will open doors of opportunity.